Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's episode of This Is CDR, which is, I believe, our 36th. This Is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to explore the wide range of CDR carbon removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals being advanced in New York and other states and jurisdictions by OpenAir. My name is Toby Bryce. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work on carbon removal policy advocacy and market development with OpenAir. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. We always like to hear, and I think everyone likes to see where we're all zooming in from. We are excited to have a global audience today and a company from Finland to be speaking with us. Quick background on OpenAir. We're a distributed volunteer network dedicated to the advancement of carbon removal solutions essential to solving the climate crisis. Growing global community, we work together on shared open source missions in the areas of policy advocacy, R&D, and activist CDR market development. There should be a link in the chat to join us. Basically, we do a lot of our business on Discord, which is like Slack, and lots of great information shared there, and that's how we coordinate our projects and our missions. So again, the link in the chat, please fill out the form and join us. We'd love to have you be part of what we're doing. Before we get started with today's program, like we do every week, I just want to call out a definition of what we're talking about. Carbon removal. Carbon removal is an anthropogenic human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. This definition is from the CDR primer, with link in the bottom or icon in the bottom right of the screen here. It's a great sort of textbook, open source textbook, peer reviewed by over 50 academics. That is a great initial resource for CDR. And we'll put a bunch of other links in the chat for resources so you can learn more about it. When we talk about CDR, it's really important to emphasize upfront that carbon removal is in no way, shape, or form any substitute for reducing emissions. We need to reduce global emissions and decarbonize the global economy as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. That said, there's clear scientific consensus, I guess expressed most recently in very stark terms in the IPCC AR6 Working Group 3 report, the recent IPCC report, that carbon removal will be required at gigaton scale by mid-century under every climate scenario, every successful climate scenario. So if we want any chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius, we are going to need carbon removal at immense scale. Carbon removal worldwide is currently at kiloton scale. This, CDR analyst Robert Hoagland has a great running spreadsheet of carbon removal, much of which has been executed or transacted, at least by today's guests, at about 50,000 tons of durable carbon removal in 2021. So we need to leap many orders of magnitude to get to gigaton scale, and we need to start working on this now if we're going to have any chance of getting it done. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who will talk a little bit about run of show and introduce today's speakers. Megha.
Hi everyone, I'm Megha. I'm an OpenAir member out in London and working on some policy advocacy opportunities in California, where I'm from. So we're going to have a slightly different format today. So we'll have a short talk by our presenters, followed by some prepared questions as usual, and then we will do moderated audience Q&A. So you can type any chat questions into the Q&A chat box, the Q&A box in Zoom, which is separate from the chat box. So please make sure to find the right one to help us keep track. The event is also being recorded, so we'll send the video link out to everyone who registered, and we will also post it to OpenAir's website and to our YouTube channel. All right, so this week on This Is CDR, we're very pleased to welcome Puro.Earth co-founders Antti Vihavainen and Marianne Tikkanen to tell us about the company's carbon removal marketplace, as well as their standard and registry, and discuss how the voluntary market for durable carbon removal can effectively scale in the coming decade. Puro.Earth, in partnership with Nasdaq, recently released the Puro Registry, which is the first registry dedicated to carbon removals and the first carbon removal reference price indexes. The Puro Registry gives needed transparency to the carbon removal climate claims that corporations are making. The indexes give visibility on carbon removal pricing trends to climate finance stakeholders, such as carbon removal suppliers, project developers, asset managers, and investors, which stimulates market growth and helps potential investors into these ventures make better informed decisions. Antti Vihavainen is the CEO and co-founder of Puro.Earth, which is the world's first B2B marketplace, standard, and registry focused solely on carbon removals. Puro.Earth's mission is to mobilize the world's economy to reward carbon net negative emissions. Antti leads the growth of the company by spearheading global adoption by corporate buyers of carbon removals verified with the Puro standard. Antti decided to found Puro.Earth when he realized that there was way too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and carbon net negative technologies already existed, but there was no business model to incentivize them. He is a sought-after keynote speaker in the transformation needed to scale carbon removal globally. He holds a Master of Science in International Business from Helsinki School of Economics. Marianne Tikkanen is the co-founder and head of carbon removal supply at Puro.Earth. Marianne believes that CO2 can be removed at scale with the latest science-based methods and technology. She leads the team that identifies promising carbon removal suppliers and projects and manages their certification under the Puro standard. She has a master's in telecom and computer science from LUT University. So presenters, I will hand it over to you whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you very much. A pleasure to be here, and sorry about my dogs making a bit of a noise over there. Really pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to see there's a very international crowd today, and so happy to discuss sort of where we come from and where we are going to. If I start just sort of briefly on some of the personal background and how we came to this space this time or this position. I think in my personal climate journey began back in the university. In 1995, I was sort of in the student union and responsible for the environmental affairs. And one of the things that we did back in the day was we invited large Finnish corporations to come and present to us students how to gain competitive advantage from so-called green activities. Of course, back in the day, sustainability was not really a word. At least we didn't know about it. So we talked about green business and how it could be utilized. And throughout my career, I've always wanted to create an infrastructure that is sort of technical infrastructure that is efficient and reliable, that allows people to interact and transact efficiently, and so that they are able to, so basically avoid unnecessary hurdles. And that's why I've been working in telecommunications, cybersecurity, digital signature infrastructure for mobile phones, and also Internet of Things. Always been with the sort of the early stage technologies, trying to figure out how to bring them to the market and establish go-to-market strategies and business models that would suit those technologies in an optimal manner. And indeed, as it was said earlier, I was actually flying quite a bit for 15, 20 years in my career, and I had this habit of, on my way back, typically picking up a magazine from the airport, and in many instances it was a MIT Tech Review or Harvard Business Review or some of the other sort of Economist was actually quite frequent, and those articles painted the picture of exactly the fact that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is indeed very high and rising, and it seems that the reduction efforts, although quite starting to be effective in Europe, globally they were just completely insufficient. And some of the other articles that I read mentioned things like direct air capture and other mechanisms as opportunities, but it occurred to me that in most cases, people who develop the technology might not be the ones that are actually best at commercializing it. And when we looked at the available business models for these companies, there weren't any. And so that's why I actually brought this idea to an organization called Fortum, that is where Marianne worked, and she was. I'll let her explain what she was working on. we came to the conclusion that setting up a B2B marketplace would be sensible, but that require other stuff in addition to it. But I'll let Marianne fill in her part of the story.
Yeah, thanks, Antti, and thanks for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I also love your name of this show. This is CDR. So my story is a bit different. How I entered here. So I had been looking at things from another angle, from the energy point of view. So I have an energy industry background, and I'm an engineer. So I think and work like engineers. And I had been working on innovations and innovation department in the energy department, looking at energy, new energy concepts, renewable energy projects, credits, guarantees of origins, or RECs, as you call it there, and decarbonizing the energy industry. And when Antti pitched this idea into that incubator, I did realize that this may be the missing piece, that by decarbonizing only, we will not solve 100% of the problem, that we do need something else in addition to that. So it's the picture of a overfull bathtub where the faucet lets in water, and that's what our carbon emissions are, but nobody's letting out the water. And I thought that this was the way to balance the thing. We can't close the water in immediately. That's a transition. It will take time. Knowing and understanding the energy industry, nothing happens in months. It's always years. So even if they do their best, that will take some time. And during that time, we need to do the reverse and how to incentivize that when there are not commercial or mandatory incentives to do that. That got me interested in this idea.
And so just to continue a little bit from that. So we made a pre-study led by Marianne, and the conclusion of the pre-study was that, well, we basically identified 3 different potential business models and ended up recommending one of them, and that was the B2B marketplace. And I'll just show one slide and sort of explain the logic that happened with that plan of setting up a marketplace. So that was the intention. That's where we wanted to get to. However, setting up a marketplace requires a product to be sold, and there wasn't really a product to be sold. The carbon credits focused mostly on avoidance, and none of them were really all about the sort of the actual storage and guaranteed duration of sequestration. So therefore, we first of all needed a bit of technical infrastructure where to store the product, which was relatively trivial to set that up. But below that, we needed to have a issuing body that would issue the products into the registry, that would keep track of the owners of the certificates in question. But that required that there needs to be a separate entity, an independent entity that would give permission for the issuing body to issue these credits or certificates. But of course, these independent third-party auditors need to have something to base their analysis on, and for that, we needed to create methodologies. Not just we, but together with 22 other companies initially from 6 different countries, we created these methodologies, 3 different methodologies, and general rules to back it up. Now we run we have a advisory board with very distinguished people on board over there, and people like Miles Allen and Nikki Batchelor from XPRIZE, and people who know everything there is to know about carbon removal. So, and yeah, beneath all of that are the business operations that me and Marianne are heading. So this is sort of the blue ones are the ones that we have a part in. Of course, the gray is something that we can't do because that needs to be completely independent, the way it is in all other carbon standards as well. But that's sort of where we came from, and today, indeed, 24th of May 2022 is our 3-year anniversary of commercial operation. So we've been operational for 3 years, and yeah, well, this is the date when we sent the first invoices after the first auction had successfully taken place.
Yeah, that's the journey of the first co-creation, and that has continued since. So I think that is yeah, maybe typical in a minimum viable product when you start and you see that what you don't have, and then you take step by step, just like Antti showed in the pyramid, that you have to invent more, build more, do more to actually be able to do the whole value chain and the business. And that's what we did. We have sort of continued on the same journey in doing in a very collaborative co-creation way the next steps, the next methodologies, and the next removal standards for different types of removing carbon. So that has sort of stayed in our DNA in how things are done.
Should we go ahead and we have a couple of prepared questions we can present to you, and then audience, please, we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A, and I would love to get some great questions from the audience, so please don't be shy and put those in the Q&A box. Thank you both already for talking about your personal journeys to get to Puro. That's usually our first question. Can you talk a little bit about, so Puro serves 3 functions. You had your or 3 primary functions. You had your pyramid there, the standard, registry, and marketplace. Can you recap what each one of those does? Because I think not everyone in the audience might be familiar specifically with the function of each of those terms.
If we start with the standard, so when we started 3 years ago, there was no standards for carbon removals. So the existing standards were looking at emission reductions, who is emitting less, and they were calculating and quantifying that part, but nobody was looking at or crediting or certifying how much carbon is put away into a storage and how long does it stay there in that storage. And that is what then we ended up co-creating. The registry needs then to take track of all of these numbered removal tonnages. So each ton is registered under a certain location and owner, and then it can have a journey from there, move to another owner, and then in the end be retired and consumed. The benefit, the climate benefit, is then consumed by a buyer. So that's the standard and registry part. And against that, then the verification happens. So the independent verification needs to take a standard and do the assessment.
Yeah, and the role of the marketplace is, of course, to match the buyers with the sellers. And I think we were forced to assist our suppliers, the ones that actually produce the negative emissions, the ones that own the certificates. We've got a fairly good sort of experience in traditional corporate sales, and I think it was elementary that we opened the doors to significant international customers, the first reference customers, the likes of Swiss Re, that actually was there right from the beginning with us, right from the first auction, and the likes of Microsoft, of course, are sort of challenging to reach out to, but I think we've done that in order to sort of promote the existence of this standard and assist the to get the attention to these suppliers of high quality carbon removals. It is, however, an optional service. So the pyramid started with a dotted line around the marketplace. So it is something that the suppliers can choose to make use of, or they can sell it themselves, or they can sell in some other marketplace. That is up to them to decide.
Maybe one thing to complement there is the global nature of the work. So climate is global, so is our operations. From the beginning, we have had projects that are in Europe, but also in Australia and North America. So we are genuinely working with projects that carbon removal actors that are anywhere in the world, and also the buyers. Many of them are international, multinational companies, and can come from anywhere.
Excellent. So one question that, just being out there in the carbon removal commercial sector and world that you hear about Puro, you're a vertically integrated marketplace with a standard and a registry, possibly by necessity, since you started 3 years ago and these things really didn't exist in a meaningful way. It has been suggested that there could be a conflict, and this also came up, I see it in the chat in the Q&A. Is there a conflict between both being a standard and a marketplace? Do you see any conflict there? And if so, how do you address it? And if not, why would you say it's not a conflict?
Well, first of all, I think every single standard has the same incentive of maximizing the throughput. If you look at the incumbent standards, they charge their fees per the number per the issued credit or retired credit. So the more there is throughput, the better it is for them business-wise. It is exactly the same for us. Nothing is different there. And besides, we still employ the same mechanism. How could we only issue certificates into the registry if it has been approved by the independent third-party auditors? So I think it's also fair to say that if you look at and download the audit statements that are public documents available for download from our website, these sort of highly skilled auditors that are doing these verifications, they all judge that each one of these verifications has been done, or the assessments have been done with reasonable assurance, which is the highest level of assurance that this can take place. So I think the conflict of interest is just it is the same for all of the standards in this space. The only thing is, the only difference is that our ecosystem, now that it is vertically slightly more integrated, is much more cost effective for the supplier. So it is, there's no upfront costs, and it's we try to make it very financially very easy to get on board and start monetizing the negative emissions in a meaningful way. We try to support them all along the way. Okay,
Marianne, were you gonna? Marianne?
Yeah, I was saying that the independent verification is the trigger for issuance. So if you trust independent audit in financials or non-financials, that's where the confidence lies, and we can not issue anything if they don't give us the volume and the number coming from the audit. So I don't see how that could be different.
So your view is that the vertical integration aside, you have the same conflict of interest that any methodology would have, and you have the same also independent verification that any marketplace would have. So it's so different than the larger ecosystem.
Well, I don't think that the marketplaces have verification. I think it's the standards that have the verification based on which they can issue stuff. So yeah, marketplace is just they exist, and if our marketplace is not suitable or good for one of our suppliers, they can choose to work with somebody else and have their corks sold somewhere else.
Got it. So just speaking of the larger ecosystem, the gap that Puro intended to fill 3 years ago, which I think still exists, is that the larger carbon markets do not do a good job with removals. The removals, durable removals, represent an infinitesimally small percentage of credits that are transacted on the larger carbon markets. And there's all sorts of, I think, problems with standards and verification, et cetera. Could you maybe focus on Europe, since the carbon markets are most advanced in Europe, and I think the same truths would hold true in other geographies? But just to keep it simple, could you just can you just talk to the audience through I know this is a larger question, but just the high level difference between, in Europe, the voluntary carbon market and the compliance markets? Number one, so I'll ask that, and then I have a follow-up question about the larger ecosystem.
First of all, I would like to address again that Europe is one of our markets at the moment. Half of credits come from North America, and I think buyers as well, almost half from North America. Yeah. So by no means we are European.
And I just meant Europe, just to keep it simple, so you don't have to talk about California or other compliance markets, just to kind of use those as examples, understanding that Puro is a global business, and as you say, over half of your volume is not Europe. Okay.
So in Europe, the compliance market is based on emission allowances. So the big emitters have to purchase emission allowances, whereas in US it's a tax credit. They get the tax back for certain things, different instruments for the compliance markets, or how the public regulation is pushing or rewarding reducing emissions or adding removals. The difference of our CO2 removal certificates, which we nickname CORC, or the abbreviation is CORC, is that it is looking only at the removed tonnages. So there is no avoidance, no emitting less calculation quantified in that credit, and that is not existing in the incumbents. So they mainly don't certify removals, and if they do, they mix it with the avoided emissions. And we have learned in our 3 years' time that these pioneering buyers don't want the mixing. They want to see the actual granular data and details of how much was removed and what is the net emission of removing. So gross removed and then deducted with the emissions of the removal activity, removal project. This is what we've understood that the buyers value and want to see separated from other quantifications.
I think that I think from a carbon removal perspective, I think that the major defects of the existing incumbent carbon markets are pretty clear. Is there anything that you would say they've gotten right? Like are there any things that we can learn from the larger carbon markets? And are there any things that you would say they do well?
Well, I think one thing that we should always sort of remember is that the the markets have been established, and they are, due to their size, they have received attention. The attention has been has raised both sort of positive experiences and also negative experiences. But I think the concept of having a carbon market is something that we can credit to the process that started in Kyoto 1997.
Okay. The awareness is certainly there, and it's positive for everybody, and more of that needs to happen. There are still very many places where both the carbon removals and decarbonization or emitting less is not in the focus. But we think of the standard as a joint due diligence on behalf of the buyers, so that not every buyer has to do what Microsoft and others have done, put a lot of their own effort in vetting and inspecting all carbon removal projects and their calculations and quantifications. That would instead be done jointly, meeting the minimum bar of a standard. And this is where I think that something has happened with the incumbents, which is not completely working the way it should.
Agreed. I mean, from an OpenAir perspective, one thing that we often say is, insofar as we're thinking of carbon credits as offsets, the only way to offset an effectively durable ton of emissions is with a durable removal. Do you think that the incumbent markets will be able to evolve to reflect that and evolve from all the other things that they're transacting right now, avoided emissions, avoided deforestation, even RECs, to purely focus on carbon removals? Do you think they'll be able to successfully make that evolution, or do you think that they will be replaced by Puro and other companies that are really focused on sort of next generation marketplaces focused on removals?
Of course, we want to say that we want to be the one and the biggest. I have quite often, so the legacy they have is of course there. It's 20 years of looking at things from another angle, from another perspective. So change is not easy. I have often compared it to my early career when I was in telecom business with the landline telephones. So nobody now thinks that a wire is needed in a telephone, that they can actually be wireless. And that's the kind of rather radical, deep change in thinking that is different between carbon avoided emissions and removals.
Okay. Just a quick question about methodologies, and then I want to talk a little bit about Nasdaq, and then we have a ton of audience questions, so we want to make sure we leave time for those. So you've published there. I was just looking at the website in advance of the session, a number of published methodologies, including for things like carbonated building elements and geologically stored carbon. But as far as I can see, the very significant majority of projects and retired credits on the platform seem to be biochar and wooden building elements. Is that intentional or circumstantial? Like, why is that the case? And do you have plans to expand the methodology coverage to transact more credits in the existing published methodologies besides biochar, and B, to cover things like direct air capture, electrochemical ocean capture, biomass-based ocean capture, and then mineralization, just the other carbon removal pathways? Is that like a future that you're planning on, or what are your thoughts?
If I may comment on the first part, and Marianne can continue with the next part.
Okay.
First of all, of course, we've got these different areas covered already early on in our process, and but the fact of the matter is that there aren't any projects that would be capable of issuing ex-post credits in the, for example, direct air capture space. If we look at the most advanced companies as of today, they are still in the pilot phase and the volumes are low. The sales that happens are for future. So it's just the availability question that is the problem there. But for example, direct air capture is part of the our geologic carbon removal methodology. So it is already there. It's a meta level methodology that Marianne and her team have developed. I'll let you continue on the other stuff over there.
Am I sharing or not?
You're sharing your desktop.
Okay. I am trying to share this, but not.
Now we see.
Thank you. Yeah, but then it goes into this format.
Display settings and swap to the presenter.
Thanks.
That's it.
So like Antti said, the direct air capture is already in our existing methodologies. In our books, it's called geologically stored carbon. BECCS and DACS are both in that version, starting from atmosphere directly from air or to a geological storage, or then through biomass in either gas form or liquid form, like some companies inject the carbon-containing liquid. This is our map of how we think of carbon removal. So starting from atmosphere and ending up in storages. So we focus very much on the storages, and our methodologies are also often called by the name of the storage. So geologically stored carbon has the longest durability. Carbonated materials, enhanced weathering, ocean liming, which the ones in gray are coming. Not yet there. The ones in blue are already available. Woody biomass burial, biochar, both offering over 100 years permanence, and then wooden materials or biomass-based materials and soil amendment offering.
Can I ask kind of a wonky quick question about the wooden building elements, wooden durables? I've heard from other places that they don't consider wooden building elements to be additional, or the additionality is very unclear. How does Puro think about that?
Yeah, so it is, I think, a very justified question. The additionality in this sector is basically the amount of economic acceleration effect. So the supplier needs to be able to demonstrate that they are using the revenue to subsidize the cost of the product in order to increase its market demand, or alternatively, they need to be able to show to the auditor that they are using those proceeds to expand their capacity. So, using that to invest to expand the capacity if they are already at maximum. So it is something that depends a little bit case by case, but it is described, in our listings. They need to be able to tell what is the effect that the money has in order to make more of the good thing happen.
Okay. One last quick question. Can you just give the audience a quick overview of your Nasdaq relationship and talk a little bit? I think that a lot of people who work in carbon removal who are coming at it from the climate side are potentially a little bit suspicious of the financial markets and of the idea of treating a carbon removal as an asset as opposed to a certificate that gets retired to compensate for an emission. Just a couple minutes on that, and then we want to switch over to audience questions.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to learn about the ESG offering and the sort of strategic sort of desire to be a significant contributor to the corporate ESG efforts of Nasdaq. So they've invested quite a bit in developing their own competence. They've invested to a couple of companies, and they have a set of products and services for the ESG. We are, in a way, cherry on the cake, I guess one could say, because of course we only concentrate on climate, and we are sort of at the if not the end of the climate journey, of course, you have to first start looking at reducing the emissions and do everything you can, and then start looking at the offsets and so forth, and thereafter removals. So the thing is, Nasdaq, of course, knows a thing or two about marketplaces, and therefore they are really good at advising us in to avoid the pitfalls that there might be, and also move forward. They are really willing to invest in this area significantly, and want to make sure that carbon removal is recognized as a legit way of managing carbon balance of a company. So Nasdaq is a great partner for us in many ways. Marianne, you want to continue?
Yeah, I wanted to markets and marketplaces are well known to Nasdaq, but the commoditization of carbon removal has been our vision from the beginning. We think that is the way the market should go in 10, 20, 30 years, that it's really a commodity needed by everybody and has a solid market where the under delivery or over delivery is then dealt with on the market. That gives the flexibility and that gives the and I think that is where, for example, these indexes are leading to. It's still early days, and that's also where this secondary trade is leading to, that money can actually come earlier to be invested in carbon removal building, scaling, than it would come if it was only self-consumed by the first buyer.
Got it. I would love to ask more questions about this, but I do think some of the audience questions will touch on some of these issues. So I'm going to flip it over to Mega, who is going to start peppering you with some audience questions. But thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got loads, but I'm just going to start with some of the stuff about kind of how you built up. So one of the questions we got was like thinking about the beginning. How did the marketplace look at the very start? Were there more buyers, sellers, and then how did that evolve as you went on?
Yeah, it was, of course, a mystery to us as well when we started. So we had to come up with a price determination mechanism that was robust enough for in the case when we have too much supply or vice versa compared to demand. So since we didn't know that, we started out with a periodical auction modeled or based on pay-as-bid double-blind auction type, and it was actually very good. And the weighted average price was actually published after each auction. We ran first 3 within 1.5 months, and then subsequently from there we ran altogether 7 auctions, with a 2-month interval. And I think in the end, the balance was quite even, so that there was most of the credits were sold. Not all, of course, because there were some buyers who wanted to buy it, buy them with a very low price, and that was not acceptable for the removal producers. So some were left on the table, but they subsequently they've been of course sold and retired.
Okay, got it. And then just thinking, like, what were kind of the initial challenges when you started to scale up, and actually even going forward, what are some of the biggest challenges you see to kind of get the carbon credit market scaling up?
Yeah, it just takes time to build facilities that do the sequestration.
I think you can see it as a virtuous circle or vicious circle, that all the balls have to be up in the air at the same time. There has to be scale up of supply, but it doesn't make sense to scale up supply if there is no demand. And for the demand, then again, there has to be money on the table. There has to be money to invest in. Then quite many of these removals are actually multifunctional. So they are not only doing removal, they have a co-benefit or a byproduct or main product that also needs to have a market. So I think that to succeed, we need to do all of this, not everybody involved. The ecosystem needs to do all of this, but it's been done before. It has happened earlier in several occasions, so we are optimistic.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think we always get this question and I normally save it for kind of the end, but maybe this is a good time to talk about like what it takes to make that happen, whether it's legislation or anything else for like that virtuous cycle to kick off and be sustained.
I think one of the key aspects is that the people, everybody, would need to have a common understanding of what qualifies as high quality carbon removal. SBTi is working on that. We know that, of course, there's the core carbon principle, the work that ICVCM is doing. All of that is crucial because that will, there are so many people that are on the fence, that are looking at the development, that would like to tap into this new thing, that would like to get things moving and started, but they're a little hesitant because of the small risk that some of it might turn out to be not eligible for neutralizing carbon emissions. And so I think that would be good. And of course, Puro is fully committed to comply with whatever becomes the universal criteria for carbon removal.
Okay, yeah. And how do you think about that criteria? Like, can there, there's different pathways. There's obviously different sort of things when it comes to storage and transportation and things. So how do you think about like creating some kind of apples to apples comparison between all the different types of carbon removal out there?
Yeah.
I think it was already mentioned by Toby here that durable emissions need durable counteraction, and that's the durable permit. So if we think carbon currency, it's quite clear that the carbon currency for fossil emissions is durable storage. Then the details need to be discussed and nailed down, but I think that there is already a wide spread understanding of that.
Right. So the sort of way that it is captured is less important than the durability aspect, is kind of the way you approach it.
There are, of course, also other aspects like leakage, and so it doesn't make a difference if there's full long-term storage, but the carbon is emitted somewhere else, or more carbon, whatever is released. So of course that needs to be taken into account as well.
And is there a particular durability standard that Puro has in mind, or that you expect to have in mind, or is this like we're waiting for standards to develop and see what the consensus is?
We work tightly with the Oxford principles for offsetting. So and of course Miles Allen is the chairman of our advisory board. So we are heavily influenced by their thinking. And I guess they define that. The permanent means 10,000 plus years of durability. So that's what we are. We agree with, although there is a place for these so-called permanent removals as well, such as biochar.
Can you talk a little bit about how they think about using Puro? How much does your sort of MRV add to their cost of CDR, and how does that help them find a market to sell into?
I think they see us as a helping hand for them, in the sense that often their main focus and business is in the operations and running that, and the carbon crediting is an extra thing which they want to get done easily and efficiently. We have the additional cost put on them is first of all paid quite late, when they also have cash at hand. So when they receive the proceeds or the income, that's when our efforts are paid for. So the entrance barrier is made as low as possible. That's one way of incentivizing the innovations to happen. And the other one is that we've actually tied our hands and put a cap on that we do it at the 8% level. So 8% is our cap, so to say, and we are making all efforts to reach that level so that we can do all of the verification and methodology development work at that cost.
Okay, got it. And then on the buy side, just what kind of buyers do you primarily have? Is it corporations? Do you have investors? What kind of industries are like looking to buy these credits?
Yeah, it's been companies typically from the software and IT, ICT sectors in general. Companies that have high sales margins and low emissions that have that can afford to be the pioneers, that can pay a little bit higher price to push things forward and make these projects and processes move down along in the cost curve. But now we are also seeing the second wave, and that's really very important, of course, that companies that are in the manufacturing industries, probably in the premium products at the moment, are also approaching us and planning on neutralizing their emissions.
Got it. Okay. We had a couple of questions about pre-cork projects. So how would those be certified? What kind of minimum technology readiness do you need to qualify those kinds of projects?
There is a pre-eligibility check that the suppliers need to go through. We are actually in the process of redefining that and slightly sort of making clarifications to that. So I think instead of describing our current process, I think it might make sense just to sort of stay tuned for our update that is going to happen in the next few months.
Okay, great. All right. And then in terms of the actual certification process, what kind of parts of the value chain do you cover? There's like the capture, but then as we talked about, there's like this transport and the storage. So how far up and down the value chain do your MRV processes go?
Yeah, now the system boundary is set from cradle to grave. So all the emissions related to the removal action starting from if it's biomass based, starting from the biomass sourcing, and then ending up in the storage where it's applied or put into the final deposit, final matrix. So all of those.
Got it. Okay.
Transport in many cases is there, but not only in one place, but in several places. Typically, it's not the biggest thing. So, for example, in capture, the capture is very energy intensive, and it really plays a role where that capture happens with what kind of energy, because it takes so much energy in most of the technologies.
Got it. Just have a few more questions. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So one person asked, could you just talk a little bit about the balance between supply and demand from buyers and sellers, I guess, on your marketplace? Which is more, and what kind of gap are you seeing between the two right now?
So at the moment, there's a shortage of availability on the spot market. So especially for the biochar-based certificates, those are in very high demand. There are different kinds of buyers. Some of them, there are companies that come to us and say, okay, now we've calculated our emissions and now we need this many sort of tons of removals, and give them to me now. That's very sort of not very flexible approach, and of course the whole market is quite tight, and it's very clear that over there we have more demand than there is supply. Therefore, companies that have a little bit longer planning horizon are sort of making commitments, say for example 12 months in advance, to make sure that they've got the availability when the time comes for a certain number of corks. And this is called the pre-purchase agreement, and that's been going on. It's a standard procedure in our marketplace. And then there are these sort of more, let's say less mature projects that have very good plans where there's probably a discount available for early buyers that want to help that project move forward, and those are then the types of buyers that of course will help increase the overall market size significantly, and those of course are the ones that we especially welcome to the marketplace.
Okay, got it. Another question that I thought was interesting was asking about the possibility of developing futures for this. So, if someone has some technology that's a couple of years out and they want to finance it, is that something that would be possible through your platform?
That's exactly something that we are now working on in regards to pre-corks. So making that clearer, indeed, but that's definitely coming.
Okay, great. And then lastly, before I hand back to Toby, there are a couple of people that we got that seem to just be interested in, working with you, maybe getting certified through Puro. What's the best way to kind of reach out, get in touch, and find out if they can be certified through your platform?
Contact at Puro.Earth is the email address. Send an email over there.
And you can do a lot of research already on our webpage under the section standard and verification and carbon removal. So that's the reading that you can do while contacting us.
Perfect.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been amazing. And thank you to the audience for all the great questions today. Back to Toby to just talk about what's coming up. And Antti and Marianne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mega.
Thank you.
Antti and Marianne, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really great discussion. And I think I learned a lot, and I think everyone in the audience did. So please, thank you so much for being with us, and have an excellent evening. We're going to close with a couple of quick programming notes for what OpenAir has coming up. Pardon me. So again, thank you to Antti and Marianne. One note, we've talked in the past about our new show, CDR Horizons, which is not a live show, but it's on a YouTube show. And our 4th episode dropped earlier this week with OpenAir member Dr. Graham Andrews from West Virginia University. And he has a great exploration of expanding CO2 storage in basalts beyond Carbfix's excellent start in Iceland. Particularly of interest to OpenAir are some opportunities off the northern coast of Ireland, which dovetail very nicely with our policy development project that we have going on in Ireland. So again, if you're interested in any of those things, number 1, check out the show. There should be a link in the chat. And number 2, please join OpenAir if you're interested in getting to work on CDR policy in Ireland. Another program relating to our policy work in Europe, it's a workshop next Monday, which is Memorial Day in the US, but a working day in Europe. The time is 1 p.m. Central European time, and it's a policy workshop about expanding carbon removal in Europe through network activism. And it's a partnership between OpenAir, Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Carbon Gap. So registration for that will be in the chat, and that should be a really excellent program. On This Is CDR, we're actually going to be dark next week, May 31st, taking a short break, but we have a lot of great stuff coming up this summer. On June 7th, we have Carbon Minerals, which is commercialization of research from Dr. Greg Dipple from the University of British Columbia, who's kind of an all-star carbon removal geologist. And it's basically leveraging mine tailings for carbon removal. And X Prize milestone awardee, part of Air Miners Launchpad. So really great start they're having, and we look forward to learning about that. June 14th is Captura, which is a ocean-based electrochemical ocean carbon capture pathway. Steve Oldham, formerly of Carbon Engineering, just signed on as their new CEO. So he's going to be with us to introduce the company and talk about what they do. Very excited on June 21st to have Frontier Climate and Stripe's new climate research lead, Dr. Zeke Hausfather. He's going to tell us a little bit about Frontier Climate and advanced market commitments. And I'm also really excited to hear his thoughts on the carbon math that both necessitates and constrains the need for carbon removal. Finally, a couple other things coming up later in June and July: Sea Fields, Eon Carbon, Climate Robotics, and then we have a number of other episodes that are being booked right now. So keep an eye on our Twitter and on the Eventbrite collection page, and you can register for those as they become active. But thank you again to all of you for being with us. Thank you to Antti and Marianne for such a great discussion. Everyone have a good week, and we will see you 2 weeks from today with Carbon Minerals on June 7th. Be well. Thanks.